So, welcome to the Christmas Cataclysm, a Yuletide calendar by my brain, which comes with a daily free tattoo design because it is Christmas, and in the spirit of giving, we're tossing all of this out there for you just for the heck of it. So watch the story, and at the end of it, you can do a screenshot, and there's a free tattoo design there for you. Or you can go and subscribe to our newsletter, and you can get it all through there. Haywood will write in the details and all of that. It's all a clever plan to give you fun things and for us to be entertained and to do social media bullshit because we can. So that's it. Here we go. There were things in the earth that we could not see, and whispers on the wind that we could not hear, and forces at play who were much more powerful than anything we could ever imagine. Mankind walked in a narrow world where a shadow was just a shadow, and technology had conquered our days and years. When the world changed, only a very few had any chance of surviving, and even the survivors had to struggle to avoid insanity. First came the winter, then came the dead. Then came the rise of trolls, ghosts, and earthen-kind creatures, and finally the war of the gods, where the oceans will boil, and the great ash Yggdrasil will tremble, burn, and fall. Our story begins in the latter days of the 7 years of winter, in the edges of where mankind has tethered itself, in the beautiful and fairly low-populated Scotland, where our heroes will come together in a fight to save Christmas and perhaps mankind. December 1st. Running was bad enough, but running through snow and freezing air was the absolute worst. Carl hated every aspect of this, but one must assume that everyone hates every aspect of Ragnarok. Fucking Vikings and their dumbass mythology. Why do they have to be right about this shit? Undeads, trolls, and sea serpents all. Oh, and that freakingly scary fucking dwarf he ran into last week, trying to buy his eye for a golden finger ring, standing there all leering and weird, telling him, "Oh, but I need an eye like yours, green and brown with golden flecks. It's just what we need to make it." Make what? Carl had asked, and the short, stout bastard had fiddled with his thick, dirty, and blackened fingers, looking almost shy, until it had burst out, "For the crown!" Carl had turned around and walked away. Fuck this. No ring is worth an eye. Fucking idiot. He stopped under a small steel bridge, made for pedestrians, and looked around. He had run along the river for a while, trying to get clear of a small area of housing estate, wanting to avoid whatever the damnable drought might be lingering there. He checked his watch, then his compass. 3 o'clock. North was there, and no one in sight. Good. Enough time to get fully clear of civilization, and to get to one of his hideouts. He had gathered enough food for a week, or more, safely tucked in his backpack, and he had even found a good lighter, making life a little easier. Fucking dwarf trying to buy an eye. Why would anyone ever sell an eye? He whispered out to the wind. And just as the words had left his mouth, he felt a thin rope tighten around his neck, felt a tug, and was lifted off the ground. He struggled and managed to wriggle and look up and saw the same mad face of the dirty, stout dwarf, pulling the rope with ease, getting him further off the ground and closer to him. "Well," it whispered, "a ring for an eye is not a bad deal if you knew what I do. See, I need your eye, so I will get it, one way or another. A trade was the easy way. Now this, not so easy. But I will get my eye, so I can make my crown, me, Graup the Kingmaker, and now taker of eyes, like a raven." With one eye, his only eye, Carl watched the dwarf walk away, elegantly tossing the eye into the air and catching it, again and again. He could not breathe. The pain was unbearable. Fucking Ragnarok was the last thought going through his head, as his vision blurred out and he slipped from this world, dangling from an overhang, soon to be a meal for whatever malice would come along after dark. The world was never a kind place before, and now, well, now it was a world that hardly knows any kindness at all. December 2nd. Hilda was not impressed. Not by the early snow, not by the undead, not by the damn Ragnarok happening. Not impressed at all. Who the hell would be impressed by the end of the world anyways? Hilda had grown up in nature, stalking squirrels for fun, snaring rabbits by the age of 10, and hunting deer with her mother by the age of 14. She knew the paths of the forest by heart, and everything you needed to know about the same forest to survive, if you needed to. Many would have called her a prepper, but realistically speaking, she just grew up on the edge of the world, so what she knew was needed knowledge. Daughter of a Norwegian mother and a Scottish father, nature had strong roots in her, and the most civilization she had ever encountered was a wedding for friends of her parents in Edinburgh, an experience that left her shocked that any humans would ever want to live like fish in a barrel. But in the end, cities had been fuel for the coming of Ragnarok, and those loving their café latte had been the first to perish at the coming of Fimbul. She had made herself a hideout in the ruins of an old croft, where she had built herself a shelter of wood and stone before digging into the hillside, and through efficient scavenging had managed to make herself a post-apocalyptic Airbnb, packed earth and floors, coloured glass windows, with thick oak shutters of course, and even running water, diverted from a nearby brook. Food came from hunting, gathering, and occasionally stealing from a nearby greenhouse, where she could manage to grab everything she needed to avoid scurvy. As the second day of Christmas came to a close, she wrapped herself up in front of a fire, blade within reach, and always one eye open. Ike was one of these café latte-loving humans mentioned earlier. But he was also one to prove a person like Hilda to be very, very wrong. Brilliant at urban gardening and passionate about ecology, most of his knowledge came from books, but the nerdiness had proven to be a strong forte. When illness and pandemics started running rampant in major cities, Ike had purchased a massive backpack and ejected himself from civilization, with the excuse of taking a small sabbatical. His family lived in faraway Denmark and Lower Sweden, so there had not been anyone to question his decision much, besides from a few school friends at the Edinburgh University. Leaving the city had quickly become the wisest thing Ike had done, and when the grids went down and the world went dark, he had realized that life was never, ever going to be the same. Winter had come, and winter had stayed, and with the winter a strange perpetual dusk had settled on the world around him. And the Draug had started coming, both from amongst the living and the dead. He had quickly realized that fighting meant dying, while hiding meant living, so that was now life. He hid in an old camper, parked not too far from a river, abandoned by whomever had put it there. Not far from his hideout, he had found a farm with solar panels, greenhouses with grow lights, and enough seeds to keep him alive until old age claimed him. So he had become a post-apocalyptic druid, growing his own food and minding his indoor forest, while dodging the dead and keeping well clear of the occasional troll, stomping or slithering across the land. As he bundled up in his camper, he could hear the wind picking up outside, and the early snow considered, he knew that he would have to risk sleeping in the greenhouse soon, but not tonight. Henry, Bernard, Alice, and Angie, short for Angharad, were the oldest of the legendary band of braves called the Heroes of Alba. Warriors, cutthroats, sneak thieves, adventurers, legends all. Their reputation was as real as the promise of a home-cooked meal and summer after spring. All of them no more than in their early teens, they had taken the leadership of the ragtag band of children surviving in the Edinburgh undergrounds, and now kept everyone together and alive by the means of spinning wondrous tales of their deeds, all to mask the terrible life that daily survival represented. The little ones, as so many of them were less prone to tears and panic if they thought themselves to be marvellous heroes in a magical world full of dreadful beasts, instead of skinny Dickensian orphans, often starving and fighting to survive the cold. The only advantage in their lives was the ability to see the dead, and the fact that the dead were much less interested in them than they were in the flesh of adults. Much of their time was spent in their basement hideout, under an old warehouse that might have been a grain storage once upon a time, well before it had turned into fancy offices. A sturdy brick building with a foundation of granite, it had a dry basement still packed with coal from older days, where a clever janitor had installed a log burner. There were a wall full of tools, also known as the armory. There was a pile of dirty dishes, and an old tin tub used to scrub blood out of clothes and occasionally wash a kid. The day had been spent scavenging apartments and houses for canned food in the daylight and carrying fresh water back to the hideout. Now everyone retired, huddled together by the fire on the pile of mattresses under piles of blankets and duvets. The door was bolted. All was quiet outside, as Angie started spinning the tale of today's adventures, making sure each of the 14 children were mentioned for their heroic and important deeds. She was good at spinning the illusion, and as she saw the last of the young ones nod off to sleep, she took to crafting and repairing clothes and armor as best as she could, while whispering with Henry, Alice, and Bernard. Each at a task of importance, mapping the city, sharpening blades, figuring out how to use a locksmith gun, and other clever things. Alice had volunteered first watch, and hopefully another night would go by in safety. This ends the second day of Christmas in the year 2026. You have met our heroes, been told of our world, and been given a sense of the danger that awaits outside in the frozen night. December 3rd. Ike was up early. The urge to urinate, combined with being bone frozen, had gotten him out of the camper, and he was now stomping around, trying to get circulation going. That was it. No more of this freezing shite. Today would be packing day and moving day. Greenhouses and heating was needed for him to survive, even though the idea of living in a glass house seemed completely idiotic, with a world full of draugr and trolls. But they were so scarce out here, the risk would be worth not freezing to death. If only he dared to run an engine, he could have moved the whole camper to the farm and into a greenhouse, but the thought of making so much noise made him laugh out loud at his own stupidity. No, he would have to dig a hideout in one of the greenhouses, probably under the parsley and garlic beds, to mask his scent if any beast came looking for him. He had a small fire going to cook a meager breakfast, made a thin can of coffee, and started packing his belongings, hiding anything he was leaving behind in case he would need it in the future. He did not have much, but he did have more than he could fit for a single trip, so today would be rich in exercise. He strapped on his belt with foraging bags and his knife, pulled on the backpack, and headed off towards the farm. Hilda had woken up well before dawn, fed her fire, poured oats and water in a pot, and set it to simmer well above the fire and gone back to sleep. She had no plans for the day until darkness comes anyways, so she planned to rest, fix some patches on her gear, and prep containers and bags for greens and fruits from the greenhouse. No one was ever around there after dark, and she planned to both stock up and raid the old farmhouse for any canned goods, herbs and spices, and hopefully some decent tea, but you never knew what you would find. Whomever was growing the food might have been clearing out the house already. The heroes of Holba woke up to a terrifying noise, a raspy scraping sound, like wood or fingernails being scraped on granite, but much louder. Then knocking sounds, arrhythmic, unnerving, and slow. Not a draugr then. They were different, slow but rhythmic in their actions. A troll, perhaps, or something worse. Trolls rarely ventured out in the daytime, even on the darker days. The older kids instinctively held hands over the mouths of the younger ones, pulling them closer with one hand while gripping blades with the other. Henry reminded himself of one of the most important rules, one of the few they had. Last resort, your knife is for your death. Some of the beasts they had faced had been terrible, and he remembered his older brother fighting a terrible beast with too many arms, being crushed and poisoned by its skin at the same time. His last act in life had been to take the eyes of the beast to help his tribe, and then plunging his blade into his own chest, aiming for his heart, letting the cold iron keep him in death, thereby protecting his tribe once more, but this time from whatever ghastly form he might himself have taken. With this thought in mind, Henry held tight to a child and to his blade, sharpened last night by candlelight. Alice was slowly creeping across the floor. She was the stealthiest by far. Making no sound on the old stones, she moved without much speed, but with all the care in the world, knowing full well that giving them away would likely cost them all their lives. But staying put meant staying vulnerable. They needed someone apart from the pack, someone to create a trap or a distraction. If you thought too closely about it, and you should not, tears would come to you, as being apart from the pack meant that the pack could, hopefully, live, but you would not. By the time Alice had shaken the thought from her mind, she had crossed the floor and climbed the metal ladder, leaving her perched over the cellar door. She pulled out her knife with her right hand and her small climber's pick in the other, and waited. His new bolt hole was coming along nicely. Ike had found some heavy old planks of wood, oak, which would serve nicely as a roof, and a 4x4-foot iron sheet, thick and heavy as fuck. It had taken him a good hour to maneuver it onto a small trolley and drag it from the back of the farm, collapsing the trolley in the process, but succeeding nonetheless. Now, materials at hand, he set about digging in the packed earth between the raised planter beds. Goal for today, a small cubby to sleep in. Goal for the week, a decent little hideout where he could stand up, store food, and keep his stuff, and hopefully stay hidden. By sundown, he was drenched in sweat from hacking at the hard dirt, but had made enough progress to fully lie down in his hole, covered by planks and one carefully maneuvered sheet of iron. December 4th. Hilda was doing well. She had entered the greenhouse long after sundown, having snacked on pan bread and dried deer while waiting for the darkness to come and settle. Now she was inside, silent as the shadows, and moving about with ease, having good night eyes and a knack for remembering where things were to be found. 1 garlic, check. Cover the hole with soil, no one will ever know. 3 tomatoes, check. Firm, but not green, and picked well apart to avoid suspicion. Now go across aisle and grab potatoes, and slam! The most noise Hilda had made in years were all around her, as she had stumbled on the pile of oak in the middle of the aisle and crashed amidst the lot of it. She lay there in pain, and all the panic one can have without screaming at the same time. Fuck, fuck, and fuck. Had anyone heard? Had anything heard? There were noises, she could tell. She was not alone. Had she been followed? Was this a trap? She moved, this time with grace and ease, getting clear of the pile of wood while at the same time drawing her long hunting knife and the wooden cudgel she kept on her back. Fuck, fuck, and more fuck. There was that sound again. Something or someone trying to be unseen, getting ready to pounce, or just hiding. Fuck. Ike had woken up the most brutal way he could imagine, except from being eaten alive. A massive crash right next to him, the panic reaction of sitting bolt upright, only to be lain back down by the sheet of iron and a massive headache. The urge to cry out had been terrible, and only kept at bay by the forceful thought of survival, because he was not alone. Something had come for him. Something must have followed his trail, and there had been no river to mask his scent, and the garlic growing nearby had not been enough. Cursed be the old gods and any new ones, and fuck me but for being such a terrible, absolute idiot. All thoughts streaming through his head as he tried to find his knife and his camp axe as silently as possible. Shit. He was going to end his life in this tiny hole in the ground. He knew it. Finally, knife and axe in hand, he lay there as still as he could, trying to focus on hearing, instead of the damnable headache. Hilda had had enough. She'd been silent for 10 minutes now. She could hear breathing. She could see the floor was changed right in front of her, and she was no idiot. Someone was hiding in there, and that someone was not dead, and not a troll. So, fuck this gardening idiot. The noise could have attracted trouble from the outside. It was night time, and some of the dead had damn good hearing, and as far as she could tell, some of the trolls had tremor senses and worse. Staying here could damn well be a death sentence. She moved silently towards the back of the greenhouse, where her usual exit and entry point was. 7 steps, crouch, slink, take a deep breath of cold air to prep your lungs, then run. That was the plan. That was the plan until she heard a chinking sound. Glass being pressured by weight. Fuck. She looked up, and silhouetted by the moon and the stars, she could see it. A Draugr staring down at her. These assholes are never alone, and there's always more than one. Pack mentality or a fear of being alone in death, no one knew, but she knew the fight was coming. She straightened, and in a calm voice said, "We've been found. Draugr, 1 at least, more is likely. You have seconds to get clear of your hidey hole and help me out, or I will leave you here to die. I can outrun these fuckers easy enough. We fight together, or you die alone." The sound of a human voice shocked Ike, but the message was spoken so simply and so clearly that he was immediately calmed down. Do as she says, have a fighting chance, or die here alone. She had stated it as a fact, and it most likely was. He could die of starvation in his hole if the Draugr was not cleared. Fuck. Why has he not thought this fucking plan through properly? Making up his mind, he rolled onto his front and started pushing up with his back, sliding the iron sheet aside. By the time he poked his upper body out of the bolt hole, he heard the sound of glass giving way and the terrible hoarse scream of the falling Draugr. By the time it landed, it was already dead. Hilda, having wasted no time in swinging her oak cudgel, crushing the skull of the creature against the packed soil before it had a chance to stand. It was skinny, emaciated, and stank like rotting flesh, which is exactly what it was. She did not see its face before the cranium gave way to her perfect hit, and she was up and ready for the next enemy in a flash, knife glinting in the moonlight. The other human, was busy crawling out of the ground, slowly, clearly stiff from lying on hard soil. He moved like he was a statue come alive. Fuck this, he can be bait if needed, she thought. Ike was impressed, and slightly confused. The woman fought like a being out of a book, a dark elf full of elegance, but armed with a brutish 3-foot pole with a burl of wood at the end, which she had used with precision and absolute destruction. She faced him now. He could see her, vaguely in the moonlight, pale skin with dark dots across her face. He had, in his youth, imagined meeting the fantastic elves of Tolkien's world, of falling in love with a fierce warrior woman of Al-Rashan. But this being in front of him filled him with fear. Armed and ready to kill, and as he realized his fear, he realized she was spattered with blood and brains, and what he had taken for dirt on her face was the gore of her not just dead, but fucking destroyed enemy. She seemed as much a monster as them, and by them he meant the 3 disheveled beings crashing through the glass wall of his beloved greenhouse. Fuck. One is stuck, that can wait. That one seems stronger and healthier, keep it at a distance, but get it killed. Last one seems slow, but it is inside. Second priority unless the gardener over there can sort it out. She moved gracefully, placed herself behind the pile of oaken planks that were about 1.5 feet in height, and waited for the strong one to come at her. And it did, but not like she had hoped. She wanted it to stumble on the uneven surface and meet a quick ending. Instead, it quickly bent low, grabbed the end of a thick and sturdy plank, and launched it at her, making her having to dodge, lose her adventurous footing, and be off balance for what came next. fuck. Ike was unnoticed by the three Draugr, as he stood there amongst the planter beds, staring at the barbarian woman of both dreams and nightmares. But he had learned that surprise was advantage, and a quick kill should never be missed. So, as the brutish one bent and grabbed a plank, he moved with his long strides and hammered his axe into its spine, sending it crumbling to the ground. Sure, these bastards can take a beating and lose a limb, but a fight is fairly lost when you have no connection to your legs. He reeled, trying to bring his axe with him, but realized it was lodged in the spine of his prey. He now faced another of these critters, badly positioned and armed with a knife in his offhand. Not good at all, he thought, as the creature launched itself at him like a pouncing wolf. Damn, agile and sneaky bastard. And his knife had failed to pierce the skin. This day had officially gone to hell. Hilda was surprised, to say the least, that the lumbering gardener had moved so swiftly and had dispatched of the brute so quickly. She was more surprised that he seemed to effortlessly hold onto his axe, with its fairly short handle, meaning the damned Draugr was basically dangling from his right arm, raking its claw-like nails on the ground, trying to get to her, trying to turn, trying not to die a final death. All right, the gardener can fight a bit. That is lucky, she thought, as the man went down with the second Draugr on top of him. Ah, well, let's not lose an ally just yet, she thought, as she swung her cudgel in a perfect arch, planning on crushing yet another skull. Planning, but failing. This damned thing was fast. It had sensed the attack and swung to the side. The cudgel connected with a shoulder and clearly did the damage, but the fucking thing was still alive. It rolled away and got up on all fours, looking at her with pale eyes, its few whips of matted hair falling in front of its face, rotting teeth bared in the moonlight. Ike was free as soon as he had been pinned. He had seen teeth in front of him, and then he heard the thump, most likely of the terrifying club, connecting. He breathed, realized he was on top of the not-quite-dead Draugr, and to his horror realized that the third of this trio of cunts had gotten free of the window frames, lumbering towards them while stumbling in its own guts, most of which had been sliced out of his gut when it was caught in the broken glass and metal. Of the many talents these creatures possessed, charm and manners were not amongst them. He scrambled up, plunged his knife into the skull of the downed one as he went, and ran to his saviour's side, then realized the idiocy in this. Considering she was facing the fast one of the fuckers, he should have flanked that one instead. He noticed her tense, readying to be attacked, and he decided to do his best to improve her odds. So he bent down fast, grabbed a plank of wood, throwing it towards the fast bastard as he rose, hoping to make it stumble. As the plank connected with its shins just as it was about to launch itself, and it tumbled, and the barbarian woman ended its misery with a fast swing of her club. Without hesitation, not even stopping her movements, she walked over the deceased Draugr towards the last one with its stinky guts hanging out, hammered its flailing arms aside with the club, and crushed its head in the backswing. Holy fuck, he was more afraid of her than he was of the damned dead ones. The beast had gone, without doing much but scaring the shit out of all of them, and leaving a lot of terrible claw marks on the floor, door, and walls. It either had a lot of different sized claws, or a lot of arms with different hands? Paws. Alice was still shaking, even after a night of sleep. She'd been prepared for the end to save her flock, and Angie was keeping a close eye on her. The heroes had finally dared to leave their hideout well after dawn, after about 12 hours of silence. The beast had stayed, sniffing around for a long time, and the older ones had decided that no one would go out that day, leaving everyone cooped up and somewhat eager for an adventure. Now they were out and about, with scouts spread out, keeping a sharp eye, while the rest were scrounging through a shop full of old smartphones, TVs, and similar useless junk. One of the little ones, Dennis, had found a drawer with batteries in it, and it seemed like a lot of them still had juice in them. so they had all been shared into the backpacks in silence. It was an art form for the heroes by now, being silent when moving about. Most of the little ones even had individual signs for laughter to show when anything amused them, but in their own way, like any kid would have their own laugh. It was sad, in a way. A short clicking brought the attention of everyone. Someone had found a score. Bernard and Laura came out of the back of the place, a storage room packed with cables and other junk. They carried a wooden box together, about 1 times 2 feet in size, with what looked like headphones, cables, and dials. An old radio, long frequency, I think, said Bernard. Laura spotted it under a pile of junk. If we can get it working, we might be able to make contact with someone outside of Edinburgh, see how things are out there. Thumbs up from everyone. Brilliant. Well, enough looting for a day. Back to safety before dark falling and beasts come crawling. After the fighting had ceased, Hilda and Ike had a short stare down, promptly lost by Ike. He was not a fighter, and not good at confrontations, and he had immediately realized that Hilda was indeed very good at them. In the end, they had introduced, and she had dictated a plan. We get to the house and barricade on the top floor, blocking doors and floors as we go. The noise we just made is bound to have attracted others. Let's go. And so they had gone into the large 3-story farmhouse that he had never dared set foot in. It had felt dangerous, like he was intruding on someone else's life, and without halting she had forced him to follow by using sheer logic. On the way through the house, with its creaking doors and moaning floorboards, she had utilized her skills at traps and snares, and his size and strength, blocking as many doors and windows as possible, and warding the rest with traps. Finally, they had settled down on the 3rd floor, locked and barricaded, inside a large master bedroom with a thick oak door. They had taken turns at the watch, and as he awoke, he realized that the morning had come long ago, and for a moment Ike thought himself alone, until he saw Hilda come out of a walk-in closet carrying a storage box. "You alive?" she said. Ike grunted an acknowledgement. "What are you searching for?" "Food. We are trapped, at least for now. The Draugr are not alone. There are a lot more around the house now. I think they travelled in a larger pack, and since our fine stash of plant life is down there in the greenhouse, we need something else to eat." Fuck. How stupid had they been, not grabbing at least some canned supplies on the way out and up. Well, nothing to do but search. He got out of bed and lumbered to the bathroom. In their secure basement, the heroes of Alba were busy going through the loot of the day, and several of them, who were more technically inclined, were now working on the radio, trying to get it working. It seemed to be missing some wiring and bits, and to be fixed to run on the batteries they had scrounged. But besides from that, there was hope. They were all excited, both for the chance of contact with others and simply because of a success. Everyone were engrossed in their tasks when the firelight started dimming, and a cold came through the room, along with an eerie sound. Hardly audible at first, it sounded just like the wind catching a corner, but Angie held up a hand, and all immediately went silent, listening. The keening was there again, a little louder, mournful. It sounded like it slowly swept around the building, as if it was carried by the wind. But this was not Mother Nature. Again, louder, sharper. Slowly, soundlessly, everyone gathered by the fireplace, back to the fire, knives in hand, several of the kids clutching amulets. With care, precision, and silence, Henry and Angie started drawing a circle on the floor, connected to runes and sigils, and every time a rune was complete, they breathed on it, watched it shimmer slightly. When it was complete, they settled down with the rest for a sleepless night. Even with the runes, a nightmare could get to you if you slept. Hilda felt trapped, even though she knew she could get through the small grid of Draugr around the house. She felt trapped because they were too near her hideout and her source of food. If she fought them, more would come, more would hear. If she let them alone, on the other hand, there was a fair chance they would just wander off, and life could go back to normal. Well, as normal as could have been had with a large nerd around here. She had spent the day searching first the master bedroom, then carefully the rest of the third floor, with Ike keeping watch by the stairs. She had not found anything interesting, not much for food, no weapons. She had found a small medical kit, one of the green ones with a white cross, basic band-aids and a bandage, needle and thread and some alco-gel. Would not save a life, but could make a life easier. Late in the afternoon, she had spotted a small shutter, most likely leading up into the attic space. That would be for tomorrow. Searching a dark space and crawling amongst rafters was a daytime activity. They walked back to the master bedroom, barricaded themselves again, and was about to spend the evening in silence, when Ike called her over to the window with a wave. No words, he just pointed, and she saw them right away. 3 of them, 2 huge ones and a smaller one, all reaching the treetops. Jotnar, these were black-skinned, with gleaming, bluish stones covering their backs and tops of their heads as well as the outer arms. It was hard to tell in the gloom, and at a distance if these were the clever kind, but no matter what, they were, luckily, heading east, away from the house.